August 7th, 1942. Noon, Gavutu Island, Solomon Islands. 395 Marines from the 1st Parachute Battalion hit the beach under withering fire from Japanese positions carved into solid rock. In their hands, a weapon that cost $50 to manufacture. Lightweight, accurate, innovative, the perfect budget alternative to the $225 Thompson they couldn't afford to wait for. Within 48 hours, 212 of those Marines would be eliminated or severely wounded, nearly 2 out of every 3 men, and the weapon malfunctions would turn close-quarters combat into a nightmare. A paramarine crouches behind coral rock, Japanese voices echoing from a cave entrance 10 yards ahead. He raises his M50 Reising, squeezes the trigger, click. He pulls the charging handle. Tries again. Nothing. The bolt is locked halfway back. Sand in the action, or maybe moisture, or maybe the magazine has jammed again. Doesn't matter. The cave is spitting fire and his submachine gun is a 7-pound paperweight. He drops it, grabs his knife, and rushes forward because that's all he has left. This scene repeats itself dozens of times across Gavutu that day. Different Marines, different positions, same result. The weapon designed to save America money is costing Marines everything. Rewind 3 years. 1938. Europe is arming for war, and Eugene Reising sees an opportunity. He's not some amateur tinkerer, he's legitimate. In the early 1900s, he worked directly under John Moses Browning himself, contributing to the final design of the .45 caliber M1911 Colt pistol. Throughout the 20s and 30s, he designed commercial rifles and pistols that actually sold. But now, Reising is focused on a bigger problem, the Thompson submachine gun. It's magnificent. Gangsters love it. Soldiers love it. But here's the issue. $225 per unit. Over 150 hours of skilled machining. Every single Thompson required hand-fitting by master craftsmen. Beautiful? Absolutely. Practical for mass wartime production? Not even close. America is watching Europe burn and doing the math. If war comes, they'll need thousands of submachine guns immediately. Tens of thousands. And waiting months for enough Thompsons to roll off production lines could cost them battles, maybe even the war. Reising designs a solution that's genuinely innovative. The secret ingredient, a delayed blowback system that keeps the bolt from flying backward the instant the gun fires. This allows the weapon to fire from a closed bolt, making it more accurate than the Thompson. The first shot actually goes where you aim, plus it's lighter, 6.75 pounds empty versus the Thompson's 10.75. Easier to carry, easier to handle. And the manufacturing breakthrough? It can be produced for $50 per unit, 1/4 the Thompson's cost. In 1941, Reising pitches his design to Harrington and Richardson, a respected Massachusetts firearms manufacturer. They're impressed. Production begins. On paper, the Reising is perfect, light, accurate, affordable, fast to produce. American ingenuity at its finest. But there's something Reising doesn't test. Something nobody tests. How does this precision instrument perform when it's caked in coral dust? When it's been carried through seawater? When humidity approaches 100% and there's no time for meticulous cleaning because Japanese soldiers are charging your position in the darkness? They're about to find out. Pearl Harbor changes everything. America isn't preparing for war anymore. It's in war, right now, and the military needs weapons yesterday. The Marine Corps examines their inventory and sees a crisis unfolding. Every Thompson submachine gun rolling off production lines is earmarked for the Army or British contracts under Lend-Lease. Marine tankers need compact weapons, junior officers need close combat firepower. And the newly formed Marine parachute battalions, the elite Paramarines, need something they can actually jump with. The Thompson is too long, too heavy, too bulky for airborne operations, and most importantly, there aren't enough of them. In November 1941, Marine Corps brass examined the Reising at Quantico, Virginia. They run hurried tests in controlled conditions. Clean environment, careful maintenance, range conditions. The gun performs well. The evaluators note the Reising is acceptable when maintained to standards. That phrase, when maintained to standards, seems reasonable in Virginia. But the jungles of Guadalcanal aren't a rifle range, and Marines don't get 8 hours between battles to meticulously disassemble and clean complex delayed blowback mechanisms. The Corps faces an impossible choice: wait indefinitely for enough Thompsons, or adopt an affordable alternative that's available now. In early 1942, desperate for any submachine gun, they choose the Reising. The order: 65,000 units, needed yesterday. The Model 50 with a full wooden stock for general issue. The Model 55 with a folding wire stock and shortened barrel for the Paramarines. It's not that they're ignoring warning signs, it's that they don't have options. Every day without adequate weapons is another day their Marines train with bolt-action rifles while the Japanese fortify Pacific Islands. The Reising is available, it's affordable, it works in testing, so they gamble. The entire 1st Parachute Battalion will carry M55s into combat, lighter than a Thompson, more compact, 1/4 the cost. On paper, it's the perfect solution for America's budget-conscious military. But nobody tests it in a jungle. Nobody tests it in 100% humidity. Nobody tests it caked in coral dust and sand. Nobody tests it when a Marine's hands are slick with sweat and his weapon has been carried through mud and seawater for 3 days straight while being shot at. Operation Watchtower, the first major American offensive of the Pacific War. Some call it Operation Shoestring because Marines go in with barely enough supplies, barely enough support, and definitely not enough reliable weapons. When the 1st Marine Division hits the beaches of Guadalcanal that morning, over 4,200 Marines are carrying Reisings, not by choice, by necessity. 20 miles across Sea Lark Channel, the situation is about to get infinitely worse. The small islands of Tulagi, Gavutu, and Tanambogo are defended by elite Japanese Special Naval Landing Forces, Japan's equivalent of Marines. They've turned these islands into fortresses with positions carved into solid rock, positions that naval bombardment can't touch. At noon on August 7th, the 1st Parachute Battalion, 395 men, hits the beach at Gavutu. The fire is immediate and devastating. The Paramarines push forward anyway, their M55 Reisings ready. The fighting is exactly what submachine guns are designed for: close quarters. Cave clearing, rock-to-rock combat where the difference between life and death is measured in seconds. And that's when the fatal flaw reveals itself. The magazines jam, not occasionally, constantly. The 20-round magazines use a double-stack, single-feed configuration, 20 rounds stacked in 2 columns that have to feed through a single opening. In a clean environment, it works. In coral dust and sand and humidity, any debris that gets inside causes the rounds to bind. And on Gavutu, there's dirt everywhere, sand everywhere, moisture everywhere. When a Paramarine's Reising jams, clearing it isn't simple. The delayed blowback mechanism, so innovative on the drawing board, creates complex stoppages. The bolt locks up in unpredictable ways. Under fire, with Japanese soldiers meters away, there's no time to diagnose and fix a complicated mechanical failure. Some of the folding wire stocks, designed lightweight to save weight and cost, snap during combat. Not every burst, but often enough that Marines start losing trust. When your stock breaks, you're left holding an unwieldy chunk of metal with no way to shoulder it properly. A paramarine later describes the nightmare. The guns jammed in the mud and sand. The jams were so complicated you couldn't clear them in a fight. You were left with nothing but knives. The battle for Gavutu lasts 2 days. By the time it's over, 212 paramarines out of 395 are eliminated or severely wounded, 56% casualties. Some losses are due to poor naval gunfire support, some from friendly fire when bombers drop ordnance short, but weapon malfunctions at critical moments turn close-quarters fights that should be survivable into death sentences. How many times does a Marine squeeze the trigger and get nothing? How many times does a jam force a man to charge a Japanese position with just a knife? How many close-quarters fights are lost because the $50 solution fails when it matters most? On Guadalcanal itself, something is happening in the Marine camps. The stories are spreading, not official reports, not formal complaints through the chain of command. Word of mouth, campfire conversations. One unit tells another about the Reising failures. A corporal who survived Gavutu describes watching his buddy's gun jam 3 times in 30 seconds. A sergeant from the Raiders talks about magazines falling out during movement because the magazine release is too loose. The fear grows. New replacements arriving from the States hear the stories before they even land. Whatever you do, get rid of the Reising. Trade it for anything else. A rifle. A pistol. Hell, a captured Japanese weapon. Just don't take that thing into combat. Lieutenant Colonel Merritt, Red Mike Edson, commands the 1st Marine Raider Battalion. He's a legend. 2 Navy Crosses, combat experience in Nicaragua, brilliant tactician. If anyone can make the Reising work, it's Edson. But even he can't overcome fundamental design flaws in jungle conditions. One Marine Raider earns a Navy Cross when he successfully eliminates the occupants of a fortified Japanese cave with his Reising on August 8th. It's one of the few success stories. Marines will repeat this story for years, but they'll repeat the failure stories far more often. As the campaign wears on, the same problems appear in report after report. Magazines jam after nearly every shot. The bolt won't close because sand or grit works into the action. Firing pins, made from questionable steel, break easily. The receiver, barrel, and magazine rust almost immediately in Guadalcanal's brutal humidity. The design trap. To speed production and reduce costs, Harrington and Richardson hand-fitted many components. Each gun is essentially custom-built. If you break a part, you can't just grab a replacement from another Reising. You need the exact part from your exact gun. This might work for police departments back in the States. In the Pacific, where spare parts are scarce and supply lines are stretched, it's catastrophic. Marines being Marines, they try to improvise. During one operation, an entire company disassembles all their Reisings for cleaning at the same time and mixes up the parts. When they reassemble them, nothing works properly. Bolts from one gun don't fit another receiver. Trigger mechanisms won't function in different frames. Weapons that were marginally functional become completely useless. The frustration turns to anger. The anger turns to hatred. Some Marines reportedly throw their Reisings into the Lunga River so they can draw better weapons from supply. Whether Lieutenant Colonel Edson officially orders this remains debated by historians, but multiple veterans report doing exactly that on their own initiative. One anonymous Marine states it plainly years later. "My last recollection of that weapon was that I flung it into the mouth of the Lunga River, and to this day it's probably still there." Morale takes a hit. It's one thing to face a determined enemy. It's another thing to face them with a weapon you can't trust. The psychological impact spreads through units. Every jam reinforces doubt. Every malfunction makes the next Marine less willing to rely on the gun in his hands. By late 1942, photographs from Guadalcanal tell the story. Only a few Marines are still carrying Reisings, as M1 carbines and simplified M1 Thompson submachine guns finally reach the combat zone. Surviving M50s and M55s disappear rapidly. Marines trade them for anything else. Springfield rifles, captured Japanese Nambu pistols, anything that will actually fire when you pull the trigger. In early 1943, the Marine Corps officially cancels all Reising production contracts. The weapon that was supposed to solve their submachine gun shortage is restricted to stateside commands only. No more frontline deployment. The 1st Parachute Battalion, which suffered such devastating casualties at WWII, is withdrawn from Guadalcanal and re-equipped with M1941 Johnson rifles. The Paramarines never carry Reisings into combat again. The numbers tell the story. The Marine Corps ordered 65,000 Reisings. At least 63,500 were delivered before contracts were terminated. Over 100,000 total were manufactured during the war, with additional guns going to the Coast Guard, Allied nations under Lend-Lease, and the Office of Strategic Services for covert operations. But in frontline Marine combat units fighting across the Pacific, the Reising is finished, done, relegated to the dustbin of history as one of the most unsuitable submachine guns ever carried into jungle warfare. Here's what makes this story even stranger. The Reising wasn't actually a fundamentally flawed weapon. Under the right conditions, it was genuinely good. The 20,500 Model 50s manufactured for the U.S. Coast Guard in July 1942 performed well. Coast Guardsmen patrolling beaches along America's Atlantic, Pacific, and Gulf coasts carried them without significant complaints. Why? 2 reasons. First, Harrington and Richardson engineers designed an improved single-stack magazine for the Coast Guard version that solved many feeding problems. Second, Coast Guard personnel could actually clean and maintain their weapons properly. They had time, they had facilities, they had spare parts. They weren't fighting in jungle conditions while being shot at. After World War II, law enforcement agencies across America bought surplus Reisings. Police departments loved them. The closed-bolt design made the gun inherently more accurate than open-bolt Thompsons. The lighter weight made it easier to handle. In urban environments with proper maintenance, the Reising was reliable and effective. The problem wasn't the gun itself. The problem was deploying a precision instrument designed for controlled environments into the worst possible combat conditions without adequate testing, without proper parts support, without realistic training, and without understanding the weapon's fundamental limitations. Eugene Reising designed a good gun for the wrong war. And here's the part that makes this tragedy even more haunting. Warning signs existed. In November 1941, before the Marines adopted the Reising, the U.S. Army tested it at Fort Benning, Georgia. Several parts failed due to construction quality. They fixed those specific problems and tested again in 1942 at Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland. During that test, 3,500 rounds were fired. 2 malfunctions occurred. 1 from defective ammunition, 1 from a bolt failure. But more importantly, the Army specifically noted the weapon failed to meet expectations for performance in sand, mud, and dust, the exact conditions Marines would soon face across the Pacific Islands. The Army's conclusion: not acceptable for field use. They never formally adopted the Reising. Instead, they waited for the M3 grease gun. that ugly stamped metal weapon that, despite its unflattering nickname, actually worked when soldiers needed it. The Marines didn't necessarily ignore these test results. They were simply out of options. The Thompson production was spoken for. The M1 carbine wasn't ready yet. The Pacific War wasn't waiting. So they gambled on the only available alternative and hoped the controlled test results would translate to jungle combat. They gambled wrong. Let's examine the real cost. The 1st Parachute Battalion went into Gavutu with 395 men. 212 became casualties in 2 days. Add losses from Tulagi and other early actions. By the time the Paramarines were withdrawn from Guadalcanal, the battalion was no longer combat effective. 59 eliminated at Edson's Ridge. 10 missing. 194 wounded. The unit had been shattered. How many of those Marines would have survived with reliable weapons? We'll never know the exact number. But we know some Marines went into close-quarters combat with guns that jammed at critical moments. We know some were forced to fight with knives because their submachine guns became useless paperweights. We know weapon malfunctions contributed to casualty rates in battles where every second mattered. The Reising cost $50 to manufacture. The Thompson cost $225. But what's the cost of a Marine's life? What's the value of reliability when you're clearing caves and the enemy is 3 feet away? The Marine Corps learned an expensive lesson in the Solomon Islands. The cheapest option isn't always the most affordable. By 1953, the Reising was completely out of military service. All those guns, manufactured to save money, to arm troops faster, to win the war more efficiently, they ended up in police armories and security company storage rooms. Some were sold as surplus, some were cut up for scrap, and some likely remained where disgusted Marines left them, at the bottom of Pacific rivers and swamps. Meanwhile, the $225 Thompson that the Reising was meant to supplement in production, it kept fighting. World War II, Korea, early Vietnam. Some Thompsons served for over 40 years. They were heavy. They were expensive. They were painfully slow to manufacture, but when you pulled the trigger in a jungle at midnight with Japanese soldiers charging your position, they worked. Every single time. The M3 grease gun, that other cheap solution costing just $18.50, outlasted them all. It served from D-Day to Desert Storm. 50 years of combat service. Why? Because it was designed specifically for the harsh conditions it would face, because it was tested properly, because the military learned from the Reising's failure that cutting corners on combat weapons costs lives. Eugene Reising died in 1967. He'd designed dozens of firearms throughout his career. He'd worked alongside John Browning on the legendary M1911 pistol. He'd created commercial rifles and pistols that sold successfully. But history remembers him for one weapon, the $50 submachine gun that cost the Marine Corps blood on a coral island in the South Pacific. The M50 Reising represents everything that can go catastrophically wrong when cost takes priority over capability, when testing is rushed, when warning signs are missed because you're desperate for any solution. When good enough on paper meets completely inadequate in combat. The Marines didn't want a bad weapon, they desperately needed submachine guns, and the Reising was available and affordable. The Army had monopolized Thompson production. Time was running out. The Pacific War was beginning. They made the best decision they could with the information and options available. But weapons aren't evaluated in clean laboratories with controlled conditions. They're evaluated when a 19-year-old Marine from Nebraska is clearing a Japanese cave on Gavutu and his submachine gun jams for the 3rd time in 5 minutes while enemy soldiers are meters away. They're evaluated when a paramarine's stock snaps in the middle of returning fire. They're evaluated when Marines reportedly throw their weapons into rivers because they trust a bolt-action rifle more than an innovative budget submachine gun. The Reising worked exactly as designed. It was light. It was accurate when clean. It was cheap to manufacture. It just didn't work in war. And that's the only test that actually matters. From Gavutu to Guadalcanal, from Tulagi to the bottom of the Lunga River, the M50 Reising proved that you can't save your way to victory. Sometimes the expensive gun is the one that brings Marines home alive. Sometimes the $50 solution costs you everything. The Marines paid for that lesson with blood on Pacific beaches. They never forgot it. And neither should we. If this story of innovation meeting brutal reality gripped you, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Because the history of warfare isn't just about the weapons that won, it's about the weapons that failed, the decisions that looked right at the time, and the men who paid the ultimate price when theory collided with combat. Next time, we'll examine another piece of World War II technology that seemed brilliant until it faced the enemy. You won't want to miss it.